All right. It is now 4:02, so we would like to begin the webinar. First and foremost, let me just say hello and welcome to you all. Thank you for joining the Center for Applied Linguistics today for this 30-minute webinar in our Critical Conversations Research to Policy and Practice series. This year, our theme is Multilingualism Without Borders. For 2023, we'll be looking at spaces where multilingualism is practiced across, through, and around all kinds of borders and barriers. Today's webinar is entitled Harnessing the Power of Multilingualism, Strategies for Meaningful Assessment. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted onto cal.org immediately after the event concludes. Also, there is closed captioning available for this website. Press the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen and turn on. The Center for Applied Linguistics is providing this event as a public service. However, the views, thoughts, and opinions expressed belong solely to the persons expressing them and do not necessarily represent the views of the Center for Applied Linguistics. We are joined by esteemed experts in their fields who work at the intersection of research, policy, and practice in language education, language access, and equity. We're very lucky to have so much knowledge on one call, and we encourage you, the audience, to ask us questions via the Q&A box below. We will also address as many questions as we can at the end of our discussion today. Also, you may click on the chat button at the bottom of your screen at any time to share your thoughts and comments. Go ahead and try it now if you would like and tell us where you're calling from. Finally, before we begin, please be sure to mute your microphone now to avoid any interruptions during this presentation. And with that, I'll be handing the microphone off to our first moderator, Pia.
Yes, hello, good afternoon, everyone. We really appreciate you all joining us. I am Kia Johnson, the director of our pre-K through 12 Language and Literacy Unit here at the Center for Applied Linguistics. And I will be co-moderating this webinar today with my counterpart, who would like to introduce herself as well.
Hello, everyone. My name is Liying Cheng. I am a professor and director of the Assessment and Evaluation Group at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, in Canada. My research has always been focused on how to use testing and assessment to support teaching and learning in multilingual classrooms and to support teachers and students. I am the chair of the Board of Trustees for the Center for Applied Linguistics.
Excellent, thank you so much. So Liying and myself are moderating a wonderful discussion here with our experts from the field. First, we have Professor Micheline Chalhoub-Deville. She's a professor of educational research and methodology at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. She has published, presented, and consulted all around the world on topics such as computer adaptive tests, K-12 academic English language assessments, admissions language exams, validity, and validation. She's also been recognized with awards such as the ILTA Best Article Award, the TOEFL Outstanding Young Scholar Award, and the UNCG School of Education Outstanding Senior Scholar Award. She is also a previous honoree of our National Center for Applied Linguistics Charles A. Ferguson Award for Outstanding Scholarship. So good afternoon, Micheline, and thank you so much for joining us today. Also joining us to engage in this discussion, we have Ms. Ivanna Mann Thrower Anderson. She serves as the Multilingual Learner and Title III Consultant with the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, and she's done so since 2009. She has worked with multilingual learners in the US, Korea, and China for over 35 years and has served students from pre-K through the offices of corporate presidents. She has worked as a SIOP coach in Charlotte-Mecklenburg school system, and she's also been featured in Pearson SIOP's publication entitled Implementing the SIOP Model Through Effective Professional Development and Coaching. She's a past president of the National Association of English Learner Program Administrators, and in her current position, she focuses on compliance, implementing standards, supporting professional learning, and growing and supporting dual language immersion as a team co-lead. Welcome to both of our guests. And now we're going to jump right in. We've only got 30 minutes, so let's get talking about this important topic.
Welcome everyone to come to this webinar. Micheline, how does current research, including your work, help to remove the barriers faced by multilingual learners in assessment?
I just want to take a few seconds to say thank you to Cal and its president, Joel Gomez, the entire Cal staff for inviting me to be on this important webinar. It is an honor also to be conversing with Ivanna, who is a leader in the trenches, as I say it, and is a bridge between practice, research, and policy making. So I am delighted to be here today. So in terms of my research, and I go way back, over 30 years of research in the area of language testing, primarily standardized language testing. So my views have evolved since my early days, and I would say they've evolved because of the work I've done in operational research, developing actually assessments to serve the needs of a variety of students. I've worked with admissions testing, such as TOEFL exams, IELTS, and so on. I've also worked with pre-K, grade 12 accountability testing. So my experiences range across a variety of domains as well as stakeholder test taker groups. So if I can have that first slide, please, Nick. So here is the way I see the lay of the land. In my view and in my research, I have tried to move the needle on language testing and multilingualism from a more subtractive perspective to a more additive perspective. We're all familiar with subtractive bilingualism, additive bilingualism. If you look here, you see, I would hope things that are a little different. And this comes from the world of language testing. And if you're interested in this, this came from an article that I published in Language Assessment Quarterly in 2019. So in the traditional standardized language testing, we talk about some monoglossic ideal of language communication. We do not develop our tests where students can switch back and forth between languages. It is set with monolingualism in mind. That's how it is developed. And that's what we expect from the students when they respond. In the old days, we used to talk about interlanguage acquisition. It's like into what, from what to where. We are talking increasingly about multilingual processing. And instead of the archaic code switching, we talk about translanguaging. And you can go through the list and see how assessment is to be viewed not as a one-time opportunity, but increasingly, I think in the 21st century, we are encouraged to do research that allows us to do testing in a way that is ongoing, that is fluid, that is dynamic, that is authentic, and that is personalized. We're trying to do not just adaptive testing where we target the difficulty of the item to the ability of the student. We are trying to bring the whole identity of the student into the mix, I think, in the 21st century. And where, in terms of policy, given the theme of this webinar, policy engagement for us researchers and academicians, policy engagement was optional. We did not need to go and speak with policymakers. We viewed ourselves as objective advocates on the outside doing our research. And if it filters to policymakers, so be it. I think especially with accountability testing, that is no longer an option for any of us. With accountability testing, where educational reform is using testing in order to change what's happening in the schools and in educational institutions, we are directly mandated to develop assessments that policymakers are using in order to change the lay of the land, whether it is to reform education, improve professional expertise, supposedly of teachers, or do whatever they want. We are directly mandated by policies to develop these assessments. So we have to pay more attention to these policies, what they mean, and how we can influence them before they even appear on the ground. So my research has been in these areas, and I have pushed for assessments that are what we call authentic. And when we say authentic, I mean they are contextualized, they are rich, the tasks are interactive, they are fluid, they are dynamic. And I've also talked about multilingual and multimodal, and increasingly in SLA, you hear the term multisensory as well, which again, in assessment, we don't invent the field. We try and act as a bridge or as a conduit for what's happening in applied linguistics SLA and move it into a format where we are examining the ability of the students. So these concepts that are coming at us, such as translanguaging, present real challenges for us, but I think they are important for us to engage in. How do we do translanguaging in testing, especially standardized testing, is something that I have started to work on. They present real challenges, but as I said, they present also real opportunities in terms of engaging the full repertoires of our multilingual learners and allow us to communicate the way we all communicate in real world interactions when we have more than one language. I don't silo my languages if I can use them all in any given environment. The challenge is, how does it work in a standardized format or in a classroom in a formative setting where perhaps the teachers are not familiar with all the languages that exist in the classroom? So I hope this gets us into the conversation. And Ivanna, your thoughts, research experience.
You gave me the absolute perfect segue, as I knew you would. So I also want to say thank you to the Center for Applied Linguistics, not only for this opportunity to be on this webinar, but also for the opportunity to partner with you on the Multilingual Multimodal Science Inventory ePortfolio grant that we have been working on together since 2022. So we did receive a grant from the U.S. Department of Education, the competitive grant for state assessment. And so, as Micheline mentioned earlier, that bridge piece, you know, when I think of assessment and I think of research, I think of Micheline. I don't think necessarily directly of me sitting in my role at the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. But through this opportunity of partnering on this grant with the Center for Applied Linguistics, with Micheline as one of our senior advisors, we have the opportunity to tap into this wealth of knowledge, this wealth of experience, and this research background that both Micheline and the Center for Applied Linguistics bring. So why North Carolina? Why North Carolina and why assessment? Again, not necessarily where my focus has been, as you heard in the introduction. So in North Carolina, approximately 9% of our students are identified as English learners. So out of 1.4 million students, over 140,000. To some of you, that might be a surprise. To those of you who work in North Carolina, and I saw many of you logging on, thank you for joining us. For those of you working in North Carolina, this has been our reality for many years, the continued growth of our multilingual learner population. And you'll hear me say EL, you'll hear me say ML. We have on our websites our disclaimer for EL. We use that when we're focusing on the legislative terms, when we're talking about the students, typically ML. So we are also always looking at that assets-based approach. But back to why North Carolina. So North Carolina ranks about 8th or 9th typically in the number of multilingual learners. And we have the opportunity through this grant to look at how we can use assessment to help level that playing field for our students. So as Micheline mentioned, those assessments, the summative assessments, are required. So we're starting with the formative assessment. But when I say formative assessment, you may have very different definitions in your mind. In North Carolina, we found in the research already that formative assessment means very different things to different people. But in North Carolina, we have a long history with working with formative assessment through the NC Falcon project that we did several years back, working with Dr. Margaret Heritage. And in that particular work, we gave the definition of formative assessment as a process used by teachers and students during instruction that provides immediate feedback to adjust ongoing teaching and learning to help students improve their achievement of intended instructional outcomes. So that's what we mean when we say formative assessment. But we wanted to move beyond what we've even done in the past with formative assessment and really encourage our students and our teachers to work with multimodalities, including the full linguistic repertoire of the students. And so Micheline mentioned earlier that can be quite a challenge, especially if you have a teacher that doesn't understand all of the languages of the students. I wish I could tell you today that we have the answer, but what I can tell you today is that we are actively working on that in this grant. So in the moment, formative assessment is best displayed through classroom work. And as many of you may know, the best way to build this plane as we fly is to work with those that are closest to what we're working on, and those are our classroom teachers. So in stage 1 of this grant, we have done focus groups in order to find out what it is students know and want to know about what they're learning in science, as well as the teachers and the families. So there's a 3-pronged approach there. And with that, we're getting very interesting insights into what is important to the students, to the families, and to the teachers. We're getting ready to move into stage 2. And with stage 2, we are really going to concentrate on working with those closest to the problem, which is our teachers, and building a group of educator researchers to work with us to develop some of the tools that we will be using, which will be performance tasks, and then ultimately a rubric. Again, looking at being able to use multimodalities, including all of the language resources that our students bring. So we have a lot to learn. We have a lot to grow together in as we work with these teacher researchers. And we want to always have at the heart of our approach the fact that our English learners bring great assets. And if you've been listening to our Secretary of Education, he's talking about superpowers. So Dr. Cardona, multilingualism is the superpower, and we want to help raise that awareness of the power of that superpower and how that can be harnessed in our testing, in our formative assessment, hopefully someday in our summative assessment, but really looking at the power of learning what a student knows in the content, not just what they know in English. So I can pass
Excellent.
it.
Yes, excellent. So leading from that, and you guys have kind of addressed this already a little in your responses, but can you tell us in this work that you're doing, Ivanna and Micheline, your research that's kind of leading some of this work, what are some key insights that you guys have found relating to the barriers that multilingual learners are facing in assessment? What led you to develop the M2 SI and the multimodal assessment? What research supported that?
Do you want to go ahead, Ivanna, since Kia just mentioned specifically M2SI?
Sure. So with the M2SI, we have a number of things we're looking at in the research, but I want to back up a little bit and say what brought this to our attention. When you look at the achievement gap, especially on the NAEP, and you look at science and the achievement gap for our multilingual learners, that is one of the pieces of information that brought to our attention the fact that science would be a great place to start. Also, the fact that our testing is given in English in North Carolina, and that when we're looking at validity and understanding what the student really knows in the content, we're not quite sure what that validity is when the tests are in English only. So not naming specific research at this point for me, but saying that we are looking at the reality of what's happening in North Carolina and across the country in many places. And then we're turning to researchers at the Center for Applied Linguistics and such as Micheline in order to help us do that lit review and figure out exactly what has already been done in this area and where we might want to go with it. So to go a little bit deeper in that, Micheline, I'll turn that back to you.
Thank you, my friend. So I'm going to speak more broadly. And when we talk about assessment for multilingual learners and test takers, I mean, some of the things that we talk about apply across the board. They don't have to be about translanguaging and multilingual assessment. So when we talk about things such as using multiple measures for assessment, do not rely just on one instrument, one point in time testing. This is just good practice. When we talk about make sure that your assessments meet best practice in terms of validity and reliability, that's also across the board. When we talk about review for bias and differential item functioning and issues of fairness, that's across the board. In terms of multilingual learners specifically, I would like to bring up 2 to 3 concepts. One of them is language. When we talk about language for assessing academic achievement or content, it doesn't play the same role as just measuring language because somebody is learning French, somebody is learning Spanish, somebody is learning English as a foreign language with no ambition to engage in content where English is the medium of instruction, for example. In that instance where we are talking about language and content together, I think we need to think about language proficiency in terms of a threshold. We need to decentralize language in terms of content. We want to remove it as a barrier to access to content. So it plays a very different role. So in my assessment design for multilingual test of science, for example, I am trying to make sure where in their language proficiency do they reach a point where language stops being a barrier to accessing science content, right? And so here comes the concept of translanguaging. If I allow the student to use their repertoire in whatever language, or if they can draw, or if they can build a model, multimodal, then why should I hold them accountable to their language proficiency? Here, the focus is on content. I am a multilingual person. I value languages for their own sakes. I like to switch languages because it pleases me. But that's not the point here. We're talking about how to access content from a non-native speaker. Their life, their future depends on it. And so we need to make sure that we are decentralizing the role of language, whether in terms of simplified instructions, multilingual test practices, or capturing somebody's performance in whatever modality they give it to us. May I say one more, or are we running out of time? Can I say something here? More?
Yes,
Quickly.
yes, please
Alright.
do, because this is a great segue into our next question about
The
what
other
policies.
thing I would like to mention is to have assessments be culturally responsive to parents and the communities from which our multilingual learners come from. We typically send assessment reports, score reports to parents in a variety of languages to invite their participation. But I don't think that's enough. We need to provide better engagement in the assessment of parents. We can invite them to help us design instruments for testing. Why not? They know their children, our test takers better than we know them, better perhaps than the teachers know them. So why not a collaboration between teachers, parents, and assessment designer when we are thinking about these assessments? We can also utilize the community in which they exist as support in the development of assessment, in interpretation, and various other ways. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Micheline and Ivanna, for your insights. And I think you've already mentioned a number of aspects that how the policy can change. And I think it's important that we do assessment with our learners and with the parents as well. So what more policy changes are you hoping to encourage based on the current research? And what change would you like to see in current assessment policies?
Ivanna, you jump in, please.
Sure. So one thing that I would say, dual language education is not the only place where we need to be meeting the needs of our multilingual learners. But as Secretary Cardona has talked about in his Raise the Bar initiative, having more dual language immersion programs to close that gap for our multilingual learners is powerful. North Carolina, back all the way in 2013, actually had a global education report where one of the goals in that report is to offer access to dual language immersion from kindergarten all the way through high school to all areas of North Carolina. And so we have done a great job with that. Back in 2013, we had 59 dual language immersion programs in North Carolina. Today, we have over 240. So we really have lived that. But only about 36% of our programs are closing that gap for dual language immersion, in dual language immersion. So that's one place that we want to grow, that policies could be helpful. But I really want to stress that policies are not the only answer. We need to be working top down and bottom up at the same time, and raising the awareness, whether it's sharing the data that we have or just helping people see the superpowers that our multilingual learners have. Raising that awareness, I think, is the #1 place that supersedes even policies. So I'll turn that back to you, Micheline.
Thank you, thank you. Can I have slide 2, please?
Yes.
And so in talking to policymakers, the first question should be, who is a policymaker, right? So Ivanna, for example, spoke about Secretary Cordona. Am I speaking to him directly, for example? I'm speaking to individuals probably like Ivanna, who can add as conduit to higher up in the policy hierarchy. And so for me, if we can push this strengths perspective to multilingual construct, representation and assessment, that is a huge achievement. I mean, none of these are small words up here. When we say the additive outlook on the resources that multilingual learners bring, an additive one versus calling them LEP, limited English proficient. I mean, just that itself represents a good change if we can make that happen. Integrated languages, where we look at all of these languages as working together to represent and shape the identity of our test takers, of our students. I mean, that is also a huge policy change. Pluralistic systems that are treated as such in testing versus saying, okay, yeah, it's great that you speak 5 languages, but today I want you to forget about those 4. They cannot intermingle, they cannot bleed into one another. You cannot think through them. I want you to think like a monolingual X language speaker, and that's how I want you to perform on the test. Come on, come on. Translanguaging is important. We don't know really how to do it because we haven't done it before. We have some beginnings, some insights, and again, I and others have published some on this area, but there's a great deal to be done here. So this is where the language testing community needs to do more research to help inform the policy. Again, it's two-way street. Real world communicators, rather than saying the ideal model here is a monolingual English language student in grade 5, the ideal should be somebody who can utilize whatever language is at their disposal in order to achieve in science, in math, in the arts. This is what we care about when it comes to educating our students. In terms of additional policies outside the testing realm, I would say I would like to see schools have an actual policy statement about multilingualism, multiculturalism, and where they stand on these issues. And if we have these, some schools take the initiative, we start to see others like, oh, wait a second, they have a policy, we need to have one. That can jumpstart the conversation and help perhaps address some of the things that I have on the slide here, such as additive outlook. At least I hope that that's what will happen. We need to also provide more professional development to our teachers so that they can engage meaningfully in assessments. Increasingly, we require them to do undergrade assessment or prepare the students for undergrade assessments or for accountability testing. But where do they, in their teacher preparation courses and degrees, take courses in assessment, right? We need them to be better educated and prepared when it comes to assessment and standardized testing so that they can have a stronger voice when they stand up and say yes or nay to whatever is happening around them. Finally, funding, and more funding. None of this can happen if we do not talk about the money. We need to get together and work closely with the communities. They probably represent, they are voters. They can say more to a policymaker about what needs to happen next. So we need to collaborate with other stakeholder groups in order to move the needle on these things.
Thank you so much, Micheline. If you can see the chat, people are loving the passion of your spirit. You have very well, I'm sure, ignited the thoughts of a lot of people on our call today. Because of that passion, unfortunately, we have reached the end of our time. So we do have the questions that were in the Q&A. So if we're able to share those with our presenters afterwards and see if we can get you some responses, we will do our best to do so. And additionally, we will be sharing any resources mentioned here, as well as other resources that align with the topic for today's session. They will be posted with this webinar recording after our webinar concludes. I'll pass it over to Nick if there are any final
I
thoughts he'd
just
like to
wanted
share
to
before we
say,
close
I
out.
am willing to come back. I'm sure Ivanna would be too, to answer some of those questions. And then the session could be more about what questions that surface. So just saying.
We would be delighted to have you back.
Thank
That
you.
sounds wonderful. Well, and as was mentioned, that is all the time that we have today. So I just wanted to take a moment to thank our wonderful guest speakers and our moderators for this excellent webinar. I very much appreciate your time and participation as well to our audience. And we encourage you to share what you've learned today with your colleagues. You will be able to find this information on cal.org, and we will share that with you via email after our webinar. Please do take a moment to fill out a brief survey about how we did today. I'm going to drop that right into the chat box for you here, and you can fill that out at your convenience. Again, my name is Nicholas Scherf, and on behalf of Cal, I just wanted to say thank you very much. We appreciated having you today, and we hope to see you at our next webinar. Thank you.
Yes, thank you all so much. If you enjoyed this webinar, we do one every month. So please share this with your colleagues so you can get all of these great discussions to reignite you monthly as you're working in this field. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.